The folder landed on my coffee table with a soft thud that sounded louder than it should have. My mother's manicured fingers pressed against its edge as she slid it toward me, and in that moment, I understood something I had spent 9 years refusing to accept. She had come prepared. Not with an apology. Not with the daughter she'd buried alive in her version of events. She came with a typed list, corners already soft from handling, margins dense with her handwriting. This document had existed long before my husband's company went public. It had been revised and refined and carried around waiting for the day when I finally became worth enough to reclaim. "You have $44 million, Isabel," my sister Tessa said from behind her, using that voice she'd perfected in childhood, the one that made wanting sound like generosity. "It wouldn't hurt you to help." It was March 2026. Spring light filtered through the windows of our Denver home, and I sat across from 2 women who had spent 9 years returning my stepdaughter's birthday cards unopened. 9 years telling everyone I'd abandoned a dying father for a man who cut trees and fixed roofs. 9 years of guilt I had carried like a second spine. My husband Warren picked up the folder. He read it unhurriedly, his eyes moving down the page, then back up to one specific line. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth, the same smile he'd worn the night my mother called my 6-year-old daughter extra baggage at the dinner table in Cherry Hills. "Perfect," he said quietly. "You just put it in writing. Now my lawyer has proof." My mother's face changed. She reached for the folder as if she could pull the words back, but Warren's hand stayed on it. "You've spent 9 years telling everyone she abandoned a dying man," he said, his voice calm in that way I'd learned meant he was angrier than I'd ever seen him. "And you just handed me a bill for his medical care. $8,000 a month for a man I have a photograph of from last month holding a fish." The room went quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a clock I'd bought at a garage sale ticked through the silence. I watched my mother's carefully constructed expression crack around the edges, and I realized I had been waiting for this moment since I was 26 years old. Since the night I chose love over blood and discovered that blood had never really chosen me back. I grew up in a house in the Denver suburbs where love was not a given. It was a wage you earned by Sunday and could lose by Monday. My mother, Eleanor, kept the books. She tracked everything: grades, manners, weight, the exact measurement of gratitude she expected for each meal prepared and each dollar spent. My sister Tessa was 3 years older and permanently in credit. She was the one they photographed, the one in the center of every framed picture while I stood near the edge, slightly out of focus. My father, Roland, loved me quietly. He taught me to fish at the lake near Boulder, showed me how to tie knots and read the water. But when Eleanor decided something, he folded his napkin into a perfect square and studied it, which meant he agreed or was too tired to disagree. I learned early that his silences were not protection. They were surrender. I became the child who kept records. Cards, notes, little slips proving who had said what. I don't know when I started. Somewhere around the time I realized that my mother's version of events always seemed to differ from what I remembered, and that her version was the one that stuck. I began writing things down, folding them into books and boxes where she couldn't rewrite them. Later, I worked in the records department of a regional insurance office in downtown Denver. I processed claims, matching what people said they were owed against what they had actually signed. I spent my days proving what people had really agreed to. I never imagined I would one day have to do it to my own mother. I met Warren Mitchell on a Tuesday in the rain. He came to the front counter to fight a non-renewal on his landlord's coverage. He had sawdust on his forearms and patience in his voice, which I found unusual in someone who'd clearly been transferred 4 times before reaching me. Behind him sat his 5-year-old daughter Junie, drawing with crayons on a pad she'd brought from the car. She showed me a row of trees she'd colored, one red instead of green. "That one's sick," she told me matter-of-factly. "The red ones are the ones you have to watch." I looked at the tree and then at her. She had her father's serious eyes and a stillness I recognized from children who had learned to wait. I didn't know then what she was waiting for. I would learn. Warren was not a project. He was a tired man with a kid and a truck older than I was. He trimmed trees and cleared brush around the foothills west of Denver. He had debts and a temper he kept on a short leash. On our third real conversation, he told me, "I'm not a good bet, Isabel," like a warning he owed me. Junie's mother had left when Junie was a baby. Warren never badmouthed her. He just said she wasn't built to stay, and there was something in the way he said it that made me think he'd stopped being angry about it years ago and had simply moved on to being careful. I fell for the father first and the daughter more slowly. Junie had a private test she ran on everyone who came near them. She would find a window and check whether my car was still in the lot when she left her after-school program. She didn't ask if I would stay. She watched to see if I did. So I stopped promising and started showing up. Every day. 4 months. One afternoon I noticed she had stopped going to the window. That was the first time I realized I had passed a test I didn't even know I was taking. When I finally brought them to meet my family, we sat at my parents' dining table in Cherry Hills. My mother asked Warren 3 questions about his work, each one sounding like a diagnosis. My father folded his napkin. Tessa watched me over her wine glass. Junie, 6 years old, sat very still and tried to use the right fork. I waited until dessert to say we were getting married. Eleanor looked at Junie and said over her head, as if Junie were furniture being discussed for the room, "We are not taking on extra baggage, Isabel." Junie stopped chewing. She was 6, not stupid. She didn't know the exact meaning of the word, but she knew the temperature of it. I saw her small hands go still on the tablecloth, and something in me broke open and reformed into something harder. Later in the kitchen, Eleanor gave me the choice plainly. Him and his baggage or your family. Then she reached for the weapon she would use for the next 9 years. "And think about your father, in his condition. You'd really do this to him now?" That was the first time I heard the phrase, "your father's condition." I didn't yet know that a phrase could be a leash. I walked out of that house with Warren and Junie and did not go home again. We married that summer in Faye Coleman's backyard. Faye was our neighbor in Lakewood, a widow in her 70s who decided to adopt the 3 of us. There were maybe 12 people there. Warren wore a borrowed jacket and Junie threw flower petals with the intensity of someone defusing a bomb. Before the wedding, Warren said something I would remember for the rest of my life. "If your mother ever knocks, we open the door. I'm not going to be the reason you lost them." For 9 years, he kept that door unlocked even when I wanted to nail it shut. I mailed my parents an invitation. It came back 2 weeks later, unopened. My name was crossed out in Eleanor's handwriting, stamped return to sender. No note. That was the message. I kept it anyway, sliding it into a file drawer I'd started for the purpose. Then the phone calls started, not for me. My Aunt Margaret called, voice low and wounded, asking how I could do this to my father when he's like this. A cousin sent a message about praying for my dad and hoping I could live with my choices. I sat with the phone in my hand and realized my mother had already buried me in a story. I had abandoned a dying man to run off with a laborer. I believed it. That's the part that still catches in my throat. I was cut off with no way to see my father, no way to check, so the guilt did exactly what it was designed to do. Why would a mother lie about her own husband dying? It was too monstrous to invent. So I carried it. Junie carried something too. A few weeks after the wedding, she asked me very quietly at the edge of her bed, "Did they leave because of me?" I didn't give her a speech. She was 6. Speeches are for the person giving them. Instead, I said, "They left because of who they are. You are the reason I stayed." The next morning, I registered as her emergency contact at school and wrote my name on her lunchbox in permanent marker, Junie's, "Call Isabel." She carried that lunchbox like it was proof of something. That night, she drew her first map. Our street in Lakewood, every house, every tree. The safe ones in green and the ones to watch in red. This is our map, she said. So we know who to keep safe. I put it on the refrigerator. The first years were lean. 2 jobs between us, a rental in Lakewood with a water heater that failed every winter. Warren left before dawn and came home smelling like sawdust and smoke. I kept the books, worked part-time, and learned how to make a small amount of money cover a slightly larger amount of life. He brought the calluses. I brought the paperwork. One night that first winter, Junie spiked a fever at 2 in the morning. Warren was 3 counties away on an emergency clearing job in the mountains that he couldn't leave without losing the contract keeping our lights on. It was just me. My phone was lighting up with a work crisis too. A batch of claims that had to be reconciled before an early audit. I looked at the phone and the child shivering under 2 blankets. It wasn't actually a hard choice. I turned the phone face down and sat on the floor by Junie's bed with a cool cloth until the fever broke near dawn. I lost some standing at work over the missed deadline. Junie, half asleep, said, "You stayed the whole time." Like she was confirming a hypothesis. She'd been testing me since the day we met. My mother's exclusions came on a schedule. Every holiday I knocked. Every holiday the answer was the same silence mailed back to me. Blocked numbers, messages passed through relatives asking me not to upset my father, cards returned. There is a stack of them held together with a rubber band that got thicker every year, every card addressed in a child's handwriting. The worst was my grandmother's funeral. I found out 3 days after the service from a cousin who assumed I'd been told. Eleanor had simply left me off the list. When I saw the photos later, there was Tessa sitting in the front row in the seat that would have been mine. To Eleanor, I was not a person who had been wronged. I was a line item that had been removed. There was a crack once. Aunt Margaret let something slip on a call. She mentioned that Roland still went fishing every Sunday at the lake near Boulder, same as always, then stopped herself. A dying man does not fish every Sunday. I wrote the date down in my notebook and told myself I had misheard, because the alternative was a door I wasn't strong enough to open yet. Junie got older. When she was around 12, she came to me holding the edge of her old map and said, "I know what she called me." I looked it up. Baggage is what you throw away. She didn't cry in front of me. She tore a small piece off the corner of the map where she had written our family. I taped it back that night. Not a lecture, just tape. Then the fires came. The summer of 2018 changed everything. Warren spent that season clearing burned lots in the foothills west of Denver and cutting back vegetation that insurance companies had started to panic about. Somewhere in the ash, he saw the thing no one was measuring. "They insure the house," he told me one night, exhausted at the kitchen table, "but nobody measures the fire. Nobody scores the risk before it's a claim." It turned out to be a company. He and his partner Hollis built a rough tool that scored the defensible space around a property, how close trees came to the roof, how dry the slope was, how fast a fire would find the walls. Warren sketched the first version on the back of a hardware store receipt from a Home Depot in Aurora. I filed that receipt in a folder because that is what I do. The first person who paid them was a regional insurance adjuster from a company based in Denver who wanted more. It wasn't much money, but it was enough to make Warren look at me and say, "I think this might actually be something." Around that time, Junie drew a bigger map, the whole neighborhood, green and red. She handed it to me like a report. "It's our map," she said again. One evening, I pulled out a photograph of the family cabin in the mountains near Estes Park from my childhood. Junie studied it the way her father studied a job site. "That's a danger house," she said, pointing at the pines crowding the roofline. "All those trees are touching. You'd have to cut all of that." She was 8 and she was right. I laughed and put the photo away and thought nothing more of it. Nothing about the company was smooth. In 2020, a pilot contract with a utility based in Colorado fell apart at the last minute. The money ran out. Warren sat at our kitchen table one night and said maybe it was time to go back to just cutting trees. I didn't save the company. I just refused to let it drown on a Tuesday. I sat down with the numbers, found where we were bleeding, and cut it off. I called the 2 clients we had and restructured their terms so we'd survive the quarter. In that month, a large insurer called back because another fire season had made them desperate for exactly what Warren had built. The family missed all of it. There was a night that year when Junie had a small performance at school, and I saved a seat for my father. The seat stayed empty. Faye sat in it instead and clapped twice as loud as anyone. That was the year I learned what a chosen family actually is. Thanksgiving with Faye's dry turkey and Hollis burning rolls and Junie in charge of the one dish nobody could ruin. It was loud and imperfect and nobody kept a ledger. I stopped knocking the year Junie turned 12. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I gathered everything into a single tin box, the returned cards, the crossed-out envelope, my dated notes, Junie's taped map. I put the lid on it and set it on a high shelf, thinking I was closing something. I was really just saving it for the right day. Ironwood Risk Solutions grew one rung at a time. The 2021 fire season made insurers need what Warren had. A round of funding came, $9 million from a venture firm in Boulder, and the company went from a truck and a laptop to 30 people and an actual office in the Denver Tech Center. My first business card had a title that made me laugh, Head of Operations. I built the systems, kept the contracts, tracked every document with a timestamp and permission log. Warren built what kept houses safe. I built what kept the company clean. By 2022, we raised a larger round. $28 million. Employed nearly 100 people. By 2023, there was a contract with a utility that had once turned Warren down. And somewhere in all of that, the family that had returned a child's birthday cards for years began, very quietly, to notice we existed. The first sign was small. Tessa texted me after years of nothing, "I've missed you." 3 messages later, she was asking, in a voice trying to sound casual, how much of the company we actually owned. The warmth arrived first, always 3 or 4 messages ahead of the real question. Every single one of her friendly reach-outs landed within days of some piece of financial news about Ironwood becoming public. I didn't see it clearly right away. But I had kept a text from 3 years earlier, Tessa reaching out with warmth and nostalgia, then asking me to co-sign something. I had said no, and she went cold and silent for 3 more years. When I laid them side by side, they were nearly the same message. "Honey," Faye said when I showed her, "they don't want you back. They want a return on you." Then 2 things arrived in the same month. The first was a non-renewal notice from an insurer for the family cabin near Estes Park. High wildfire exposure, undefended slope, declining value. The cabin Eleanor treasured as proof of the family's standing was now a liability nobody would insure. And I remembered an 8-year-old pointing at a photograph and saying, "That's a danger house." The second was a photo from my cousin Roland at the lake near Boulder, holding up a fish, laughing, his color good, his shoulders square. My dying father, the one I had grieved in advance for 9 years, was standing in the sun with a trout and a grin. 9 years of guilt cracked down the middle in a single frame. If he was fine, the lie was never about protecting him. It was about controlling me. Around then, Warren brought in a lawyer named Gwen Marsh from a firm in downtown Denver to make sure the company structure was clean. I told Gwen the family story one afternoon in her office. She listened. Then she said, "Here's the problem with people like your mother. Everyone can feel that she lied. Feeling isn't proof. What you'd need is her in writing, wanting something in exchange for the lie. You don't have that yet." I started to object, but she held up her hand. "You don't need a courtroom. You need them to put it in writing. And people who do this always do, eventually. When they finally want something, they write it down." She wrote 3 words and underlined them. "Wait for the list." I also learned that season that Tessa's life was not polished. A business gone bad in Denver, debts she was hiding, a marriage that ended without announcement. The yardstick itself had been hollow the whole time. A family with a favorite in free fall would eventually come looking for a net. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt something closer to grief. All those years I'd measured myself against her perfect life, and the truth was she'd been drowning too. She'd just learned to hide it better. Or maybe she'd learned to hide it the same way I had. By pretending the water wasn't rising. In March 2026, Ironwood went public on the New York Stock Exchange. The company was valued at around $220 million. Our household shares came to roughly a fifth of that. The headline number was $44 million. What the headline did not say was that the number lived entirely on paper. Our shares were locked for 180 days. We could not sell them. What we actually had in the bank could barely have fixed the cabin roof. 9 days after the news broke, Eleanor called. "Isabel, sweetheart, it's been too long." Not "I'm sorry." Not "I was wrong." Just too long. She wanted to come by to reconnect. Tessa texted within the hour, layering on intimacy. Childhood summers in Cherry Hills. Old inside jokes. The cabin again. And woven through it, the real thread. "Have you two thought about what family is owed?" Warren and I talked it through at the kitchen table that night. We decided to open the door one time. Listen, not argue. Let them talk. We agreed on our limits before they arrived. Junie would not be in the room. She went to Faye's for the evening. I took the tin box down from its high shelf and set it on the counter, closed, within reach. They came on a Saturday. Eleanor arrived in her good coat, Tessa half a step behind her. In Eleanor's hands was a folder. Not fresh. The corners were soft with handling, margins dense with her handwriting. Whatever was inside had existed for a long time. This had been ready before the IPO ever happened. They sat in our living room. Eleanor looked around at our house in Lakewood, pricing the furniture, appraising the life. Then she slid the folder across the coffee table. $2.5 million, she read aloud, "for everything we invested in you. Your upbringing, your education. It's only fair." She went on. The company was to assess and remediate the cabin professionally at their expense. A position for Tessa given her connections. $8,000 a month for Roland's ongoing medical care. And a public statement to be shared with the whole family that I had come home. Warren picked up the folder. He read it unhurriedly, his eyes moving down the page, then back up to one line. A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Perfect," he said quietly. "You just put it in writing. Now my lawyer has proof." Eleanor's face changed. She reached for the folder as if she could pull the words back. "You've spent 9 years telling everyone she abandoned a dying man," Warren explained, "and you just handed me a bill for his medical care. $8,000 a month for a man I have a photograph of from last month holding a fish." I opened the tin box. I took out the photograph first and laid it on the folder. "He's fine, Mom. He's been fine. You froze him at his worst moment and you've been charging me interest on it for 9 years. Eleanor started to say something about his heart, about the scare. I finished it for her. "He had a real event in 2017, right when you cut me off. A stent, a few frightening weeks at St. Anthony's, and then he recovered completely. And you never once corrected the story because a recovered father is no use to you. A dying father is a leash." Tessa jumped in, pivoting to fairness, to family, to how hard it had been for everyone. And she said the thing that let the whole design show through. "You have 44 million, Isabel. It wouldn't hurt you to help. Need, not deserve." I took out my phone and found the old text and the new one. I read them out loud back to back. The same opening. The same childhood memory of summers in Cherry Hills. The same pivot to money. "You have a script. You ran it on me 3 years ago to co-sign your way out of a hole, and you're running it again. This was never a mother missing a daughter. It's a rescue for her. You just needed me big enough to fund it this time. Then I pointed at the demand for the public statement. You can't have it both ways. For 9 years, I'm the ungrateful daughter who walked out. Now you want me to pay you back for raising me, and you want me to stand in front of everyone and say I came home. Pick a story. You put both of them on the same page in your own handwriting. A lawyer only needs the page. I put down the stack of returned cards. 9 years of a child's birthday cards, every one addressed in Junie's handwriting, every one stamped return to sender. This is what you sent back. Every year. You couldn't even open them. She's the baggage you refused to unwrap. The room was quiet. Eleanor looked at the cards, and for the first time in my life, I watched my mother come right up to the edge of the truth. Something in her face gave way slightly. Then the door opened. Roland walked in. On his own 2 feet, steady, his color good, exactly as in the photograph. Eleanor had left him in the car. Brought him as a prop, never intending for him to come in. But he had gotten out and walked to the door on his own. After 9 years of folding his napkin, Roland had finally decided not to sit still. You told them I was dying, I said to Eleanor, and my voice did not shake. You buried me alive to keep him. Roland did not fold anything. His hands stayed at his sides, and he said to me in front of both of them, she's right. I let it happen. Tessa tried one last time to make it about the money. Eleanor tried to gather the folder and her dignity. But the thing they had come to do was already dead on the table between the cards and the photograph. I made my decisions out loud. No $2.5 million. No rescue dressed as reconciliation. The company would not touch the cabin. The story about me was to stop. Gwen would send a letter. Thanks to the folder, the letter would have teeth. Not a lawsuit. Just the documented fact that they had known the truth and sold the lie for money. I took Junie's map out of the tin box and laid it over the folder. She mapped what was worth keeping safe when she was 8. You should have made her list. You didn't. So you don't get to be on mine. Eleanor stood, reaching for the last word. Roland quietly sat down on my side of the room. The story Eleanor had spent 9 years telling died in one afternoon. Her standing in the church in Cherry Hills, in the family, in the small world she had curated, did not survive the details. Gwen's letter went out. A response came back agreeing to every term. The shortest, most honest communication I ever received from my family. A few days later, Aunt Margaret called to apologize. She asked how Junie was. It was small and late, and I took it anyway. Roland asked to see me alone. We met at a diner in downtown Denver. He did not fold his napkin. His hands stayed flat on the table. I let her make you the villain because it was easier than standing up. That was mine. Not hers. Mine. I had a heart scare and I let her turn it into a weapon. And I watched her return a little girl's cards and I said nothing. There's no version of that I get to blame on your mother. I chose the quiet. I chose it for 9 years. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Didn't ask for money or to be let back in as though nothing had happened. He just named what he had done, one item at a time. I can forgive you, Dad, I told him. That part's free. Trust is the expensive one, and you'll pay it slowly, and I get to set the price. He nodded. We started with a coffee once a month at a cafe in Lakewood. Small, conditional, something either of us could walk away from. A month later, he asked if he could meet Junie sometime. Not soon, whenever she wanted, on her terms. I told him that was the right way to ask, and that it would be up to her. He said, of course it is. And I believed him, which was new. I drove home to Lakewood lighter than I had been in 9 years. Junie was waiting on the porch with the map in her hands. She turned the old paper over and said, I looked up baggage again a while ago. It means the stuff you carry that you don't want. The stuff you're supposed to leave behind. You kept me. For 9 years you kept every dumb cart I ever made. So I guess I was never baggage. I was just family. You just had to prove it to everybody the hard way. That night we made a bad dinner. All 3 of us in a kitchen too small for it, Warren burning garlic, Junie narrating our failures like a sportscaster, Faye coming over for leftovers she pretended not to want. Nobody kept a ledger. Nobody was owed anything. It was loud and imperfect, and it was, by every measure that has ever mattered, a family at a table. I had the map framed. It hangs by our front door now. Green trees and red trees, a taped corner, a child's careful legend of who was worth keeping safe. The cabin near Estes Park isn't on it. It was never Junie's neighborhood, never her family. Just a red house in an old photograph that an 8-year-old saw clearly before any of us did. People ask me sometimes if the money fixed it. It didn't. The money was locked on paper for most of the story and never healed a single thing. What fixed it was smaller and harder to sell, a man who kept a door unlocked without ever forcing me through it, a widow who clapped twice as loud from an empty seat, a girl who tested whether I would stay and then one day stopped checking the window. Family is not the people who raised you and kept the receipt. It is not blood and definitely not net worth. Family is who is still in the room when you have nothing to offer and who is still in it when you suddenly have everything and they want none of it for themselves. I think about that afternoon at the kitchen table sometimes. How my mother walked in with her folder and her demands, certain she knew the shape of my life. How she left with nothing but the weight of her own words written in her own hand. She wrote it down. She gave me the list I had been waiting for. And I had the proof to show that the baggage was never mine to carry.